Good afternoon. A very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Dharmendra Kanani. I'm Director of Insights and moderator of this very significant In Conversation with series. We have the pleasure and the fortune of welcoming someone who has a very tough job, like many leaders in public service, but we are very pleased to welcome Kristalina Georgieva, a Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, to this conversation. We have an hour with you and her. We have our Zoom audience. You've all been given instructions about what you need to do. Be on mute. When you want to engage with a question, put your hand up virtually. If you can't find your virtual hand, go to participants and then you'll find it. And then I'll invite you in for questions. And then we have our live stream audience. Obviously, those of you who are listening to us, welcome also. If you have a desire to ask a question or make a comment, also use our social media platform. And obviously, you can use our Twitter hashtag Friends of Europe Debate to come on as well and post your questions and issues. So, firstly, first and foremost, let me welcome Kristalina to this conversation. Kristalina, a very warm welcome to you. It's great to have you. A good friend of the house, as I know, and a friend of Europe for many, many years. It's been quite an interesting journey for, I think, many women in the past 10 months, 12 months, where we've seen a rise. After such a long time, we now have women in power in certain positions which actually will make a very significant difference, I think, to the lives of people. That is deliberately a gendered comment because we know in neuroscience that actually women, when they're together, make better decisions than men. Today, it's a significant day. We had another powerful woman in another place this morning, making a very significant comment that I think touched the heart and soul of many across Europe and beyond, where she hit the right chord. And I think it's quite interesting the context she sets for the recovery of Europe and its relationship to its neighborhood and the wider world. You, Kristalina, have been here, Vice President of the Commission. You are the second ever woman to be the head of the International Monetary Fund, but you're also the first CEO of the World Bank. So making money work and managing money and using it to good effect and dealing with crisis has been stock in trade for you. Kristalina, I want to start with a question around leadership. You take over and everyone's heralded the fact that you're the second woman to take on board the IMF, and then suddenly, left field, the biggest crisis that's hit the world, knocks this institution, which has 189 countries in its membership, and it's set up, its goal is to secure the stability of the world's economic and fiscal system. So share with us, what's been the biggest leadership journey, question and challenge that you've learned from this that you can share with us, with this audience? Kristalina, over to you.
Let me first say how excited I am to spend the next hour with the Friends of Europe. And here, friends is exactly the word I would use. It is really important in crisis to lean forward, act decisively, and focus on the most vulnerable parts of the economy, on the most vulnerable people. And I can say a job that prepared me for what I'm faced today is actually my first job as European Commissioner for Crisis Response and Humanitarian Aid. I also feel very strongly that it is right to have women in position of responsibility during crisis. Eleanor Roosevelt has this great saying that women are like tea bags. You don't know how strong they are until you put them in hot water. So I'm in hot water and I find I'm strong.
Lovely. I think that image will last for this whole conversation. I think we'll come back to that. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Thank you for sharing that with us. Today, as you know, you've heard the speech from Ursula von der Leyen, and you yourself, as an institution, have come out with a couple of studies that shed light on what needs to happen better and more, I suppose, to build back better a green economic recovery. Share with us your insights for Europe in that regard?
Well, let me first start by saying how incredibly impressive the standing of Europe is, and it is reflected so well in the State of the Union speech that we heard today. Europe in this crisis has done all the right things, come together, lift up the capacity to respond, care about the vulnerable, and above all, focus on anticipating and acting for the other big crisis that is upon us. I want to put a bit of context of where we are.
Indeed.
And why I have the confidence to say what I'm saying about the EU, and then talk about our studies and how they fit in the conversation in Europe. Where we are, clearly a crisis that has brought immeasurable pain and suffering on people of all kinds. We can't measure that, but we can measure the economic impact, and it is dramatic. The IMF estimates that 2020, 2021, because of stopping our economy and because of the impact of restrictive measures over a long time, we are going to lose the equivalent of $12 trillion. What it is almost as if we take the Eurozone and it does not produce anything for a whole year. Obviously, this is a tremendous hit on the world. We are looking into a less bad picture. A couple of months ago, the projections we had were actually for a more dramatic recession, but the decisive actions that governments and central banks have taken in the European Union, almost 3 billion euros in stimulus, with the European Central Bank virtually relentlessly supporting the economy. All of this, and central banks of other countries, all of this has put a floor under the world economy. And of course, in meanwhile, we found out that we can learn how to live with the pandemic. But we are not out of the woods, and we will have to do more. So far, the fiscal measures in place have helped, but we know that we cannot stop now. And actually, I think I'm a rare case of a managing director of the fund that would say, please spend. Yes. And I continue to say that, please spend, keep the receipts. And the question is, what do we spend for? Which takes me to our topic of conversation today. President von der Leyen today announced even more ambitious objectives for the EU, and rightly so. When it comes down to climate, I tell everybody, if you don't like pandemic, you are not going to like the climate crisis one iota. In Europe, I can imagine, having lived in Brussels, how eerie and strange it must be to be in the middle of September with temperatures around 30 degrees Celsius.
Indeed. I'm glad you mentioned it. Yep.
Here in the United States, California is burning. Worst ever forest fires, destroying lives, destroying livelihoods. And we know that a changing climate is triggering these more catastrophic weather events. We know that unless we act decisively to mitigate the impacts and to adapt to the changes in the climate, we are going to be in very deep trouble. Why is this relevant for the IMF? And why is the IMF relevant for this conversation? For a very straightforward reason. Our mandate is stability, growth, employment, improvement in living standards. We are not going to have stability unless we address the climate crisis. And the good news here is that with the massive fiscal stimulus put in place, we can, as I think it was Lyndon Johnson saying, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can address the COVID, the recovery that is necessary, and we can address the climate crisis. At the fund, we take this very much to heart. I give credit to Christine Lagarde. She is the one that brought climate front and center. And I think she did it so successfully that here I am, an environmental economist by training, at the helm of the IMF. What we are committed to do is to support with analysis and, of course, with the programs we finance an accelerated transition to low carbon, climate resilient growth and future. And we are particularly keen to work with the EU because the EU is absolutely in the lead, conceptually, financially, in terms of where the European people are. 90% recognizing the climate crisis is an existential risk. We have to act to prevent it. In the two studies that we are launching today, and I can say that it was not by chance, it was by design.
Yes.
To come on the day when the State of the Union has so prominently featured dealing with this crisis, are on the issue of mitigation. They're complementary. One is about EU policies on mitigation. The second one is on sectoral policies, covering the sectors that give origin to 95% of the emissions. And to put it very in the tightest possible presentation, what we are recommending in our two complementary studies are three key things. One, price carbon emissions right, following the polluter pay principle, setting a gradual rising path for carbon prices, expanding coverage to all emission sources, all sectors, creating incentives for households, individuals, and for firms to steer consumption and investment toward sustainable activities and toward green technologies. In our view, the best way, the most efficient way to price carbon is through a carbon tax. But we respect that the EU has also a very effective trading system. What we want to see is very simply to move the revenue raising objectives of governments from taxing people, taxing labor, to taxing pollution or pricing pollution in a way that it shrinks. And we know that in the next months and years, governments will be putting in place medium-term fiscal consolidation plan. The stimulus that we are injecting, it does need to have a way of sourcing revenues, and we think it is a good moment to shift the burden towards pollution. And the evidence is that taxing pollution is better for growth than taxing labor or taxing consumption. So that is our first recommendation. We are absolutely together with you, with Europeans, on providing very clear forward guidance so firms and individuals would know what is to come. Second, okay, we raise money. What do we do with this money? Obviously, governments need to support green investments. And I love what Europe is doing with the Next Generation EU plan. Also, at the national level, countries are really raising the bar on what they're going to support to have more green investments. And there are some that are particularly attractive because they're also job-rich investments. And we know people worry about the future of jobs, what is going to happen with some sectors, contact dependent sectors, shrinking. We want to see more in innovation, more in less developed renewables, and also more in carbon capture and storage, so we can have the uh, action on mitigation, the mitigation front, recovering the economy from COVID, but also preventing a deepening of the climate crisis. The third point is probably the most important one. You know it, and we amplify it in our papers, and it is supporting a just transition.
Mm-hmm.
It is not that everybody would easily win. If you are a worker in a sector that is high carbon intensity sector, you're not going to be supportive of this unless you know what is the future of your job. If you are low income household, and energy prices, as we adjust the carbon tax, go up, you may be restricted in your mobility, your chance to go to jobs. We have to make sure that the attention to that just transition is meaningful, and it is strongly underpinned by what governments invest in, what incentives they put, uh, and how the social fabric
Mm.
of our countries is supported by this common objective, with fairness of how the burden of achieving that objective is shared. And we have concrete ideas around how that can be done, how we can help protect people, we can help reskilling of people, how we can create access to financing for new businesses to start. And let me finish by saying with the obvious, which is action within the EU is not going to be enough. The EU cannot stop global warming on its own, but it can bring the world together. And we are advocating in that, reaching out for the EU to play a lead role in putting a carbon pricing floor globally, not just in the EU. It would be the most important agreement if we are to create the incentive for the recovery from COVID to be also preventive in terms of climate uh, in terms of the climate crisis. Uh, I want to say that also is very important in terms of fairness towards European businesses. And in the papers, we have some specific suggestions around how that fairness can be achieved. I mean, let me finish with what is so very clear. We have a huge risk. We have a fantastic opportunity. It would be so short-sighted to pour tons of money in fiscal support only to have the economy of yesterday, with all its problems and growing inequality. It has to be a bridge to something better. And I don't need to say more on that, because Ursula did such a great job speaking about it today.
Indeed she did.
Yeah, thank you.
Kristalina, thank you so much. It just, it's refreshing, and there's something about the tone of optimism that you strike here that, reminds me of the opening statement about the tea bag, and you only know when you're in hot water how to kind of survive. And it's a clear example of that, where you are kind of, you're confounding a lot of economic theorists, because a lot of people that have been struck by the COVID situation is thinking, my goodness, spend more. As you know, many theorists have said spend less. And you're saying tax polluters rather than those in terms of the citizens themselves. But you're also saying clearly spend more in the right direction, which is to ensure that green recovery. I want to bring the audience in because they've been very patient. But the things I'd like you to think about is that you know as well as I do and we do here in this room is that politicians are going to be the ones that will navigate this in the right direction or the wrong direction. And in Europe, we know that in the East, we have a fossil situation where we're going to have to be able to create the right circumstances to move in a greener direction. And we also know there are a number of male political leaders, particularly in Europe, in its neighborhood, and across the pond, who are climate deniers. And so, despite what we say, we've got a long way to go. And I think the final point before I open up the floor, I think it is a radical solution in terms of a carbon floor pricing. And Europe can absolutely move into a leadership role that's been created by the vacuum of the US and others. But how to make that system work is really the issue. I'm going to open up, and I already have one person lined up. Geneviève. Geneviève Ponce, are you there? Welcome.
Hello, welcome. Hello, Dharmendra.
Hello. How are you?
I'm very fine, and it's a great day for me because two powerful women are speaking about a greener world, which is my engagement for decades, I must say.
Say where you're from, just for the sake of our audience, Geneviève.
I have two questions very precise to Mrs. Georgieva. The first one is about a border carbon adjustment mechanism, and I will have a second one on green bonds. So the first one, yes, Europe must lead by example, set a high price. If we want to be carbon neutral, we need a high carbon price. However, for the most carbon intensive industries, it will be difficult, and especially it raises the risk of carbon leakage if we act alone. So we cannot act alone, because if there is carbon leakage, we will not reach our objective, which is carbon neutrality for the world, not only for Europe. So how do we do if we do not use a border carbon adjustment mechanism? That's a question I have, first one. Second one, this morning, Mrs. von der Leyen has indicated very clearly that 30% of the 750 billion euros will be raised through the emission of green bonds, which is for us a wonderful news, as we had advocated in Europe Jacques Delors exactly for that. And my question to the head of the IMF is, would you advise for such measures elsewhere in the world? Thank you.
And obviously you're from the Jacques Delors Institute. Thank you for your question. I'm going to take one more before a couple of more before I move back to you, Kristalina, if I may. We have Dragos. I hope I've pronounced your name right.
Yeah, thank you so much. Today is really a delight. I'm actually speaking to you from the European Parliament. The bell that you're hearing is the plenary bell that, is about the voting session. But it was a delight.
Say who you are and the organization you represent. Sorry.
Markus Puslar, a member of the European Parliament, Renew Europe. Again, thank you very much, Friends of Europe, for this invite. And indeed, I was saying that it's a delight to hear in the morning the speech of Ursula von der Leyen on the State of the Union, and now to have this magnificent opportunity to hear Kristalina. And hello from a Romanian to a neighbor Bulgarian. So two questions. First question. I mean, the Parliament is strongly supporting to have a clear view ahead related to the system of own resources, and I would really like to hear your reflection on how important the financial markets and overall, the signal would be, and how do you see that? I mean, what is the key in which you are seeing that? And the second question relates to the, let's say, to the importance of being pragmatic as well. And I mean, you have been working in the World Bank so many years, and we are right now talking about the Green Deal, about transition, and about a just transition. So, how do you see the process for the countries that still have, mines and still have vulnerable areas?
That's the point I was making. Dragos, before you go, because I mean, you ask a good question, but can I flip something back to you? One of the key issues is about the role of the parliament and what kind of teeth it will have
that's another
in terms of conditionality and making sure there's accountability. Very quickly, give me a 60-second response to that, because you're an MEP. What's your view? What do you think should happen?
I think that we need to preserve the balanced role in between the Parliament and the Council, and I'm actually a co-rapporteur on the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and we've asked for a delegated act with the Commission, and we would like to be at par with the Council. It's just normal for us to preserve the right that we've obtained during decades, and I'm sure that we are going to find a suitable compromise, not to deviate towards intergovernmentalism. So that's actually one of the key points of the parliamentary negotiation that are coming.
Indeed, because this is the biggest use of taxpayer money, and taxpayers will want to know it's going to the right place, and that then money isn't going to the right, but they have to trust you and the institution you represent, that you will actually hold power to accountability, etc. So I'm going to take the third question from Megan Malloy.
Hi, Dharmendra. How
Hello.
are you?
Please say who you are. I know you, but obviously our audience doesn't.
I'm Megan Malloy. I am one of Friends of Europe's European Young Leaders, and I run an organization here in the U.S. called Republican Women for Progress. My day job, I'm also at the Institute of International Bankers, which I think has a lot of relevance here. So, Madam Managing Director, I just want to thank you for the time. I'm here in Washington, so I realize that you're foregoing a beautiful early fall day here to talk to us. And before I ask my question, I want to just brag real quick on your first Deputy Managing Director, Jeff Okamoto. He has been an incredible resource for us and just so many insights and knowledge from the IMF. So thank you to your team. I kind of want to diverge a little bit from the two previous questions. I know you were in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago talking about the importance of gender equality, not just to that overall conversation, but really truly to economic recovery. And so as we're thinking about kind of this green recovery and gender equality and elections coming up here in the US, I would love to hear your thoughts on specific roles that institutions and governments can play in really promoting gender equality for the better good of this economic recovery.
Thank you, Megan. So, Kristalina, I'm going to come back to you. Thank you very much for that question. Kristalina, you've been in this playground, if I can call it that, of Europe for many years. So you know that the first set of questions are ones which have dogged the debate around moving towards a greener recovery. What's your response to what you've heard from colleagues who are asking a question about carbon border adjustment tax, green bonds, and what we do around the east of Europe in particular, where you have a very significant issue about infrastructure, which is fossil-based, and how you transition in a just way. Kristalina, over to you.
Excellent questions. Actually, the border adjustment tax is one that the team at the fund spent quite a lot of time researching, debating until we took a position, and it is in the papers we are launching today. So our view is as follows. First best solution is to have a carbon price floor across the major emitting countries. Okay. This is what we should be striving to achieve. It would lead to most efficient for everybody way of getting to low carbon growth. But in the absence of such agreement, or I being the ultimate optimist, until we achieve that agreement, Europe would find itself in a situation in which large differences in carbon prices between the EU and EU's trading partners would lead to trade distortions. And they would create potentially risks of polluting industries, carbon intensive industry, moving from Europe elsewhere. And when that happens, we do nothing for climate. And of course, risks of affecting the competitiveness of European industries. And that takes us to the next best solution, which is, from an economic point of view, that it would be right for the EU to charge for the carbon content of imports the same rate that the charge is imposed on domestic products. That is a border adjustment. It would create a level playing field. It would prevent trade distortions. Very important, it would minimize carbon leakage. And it would make it so that European policies are as effective as possible to achieve the objective of reducing carbon emissions. Now, obviously, this is a very delicate area. Other countries may not like it. But it is possible to do it in compliance with WTO rules. And there are certain issues that need to be considered. Again, none of them is easy, but they can be addressed. How to measure the carbon content of products the EU imports? Which industries to cover? Whether to take this taxation to a place where there are preferential rates for low-income countries, how to use the revenues, and whether there should be a tax on the imports, or if those who export to the EU buy allowances from the European trading scheme, so they actually participate to developing the domestic carbon market. These are questions that are going to be, of course, addressed thoroughly, and
Sure.
the IMF would offer expertise. We are also very keen to learn, because this is a completely new
Exactly,
era.
it's a game changer.
It's a game changer, and we have to be really mindful that we don't want to add fuel to the trade disputes fire.
Precisely.
So if we have to do it, it has to be done extremely carefully. On
it's
green bonds,
Yeah. But
I'm
I
sorry,
need you to be
yes,
briefer because we've got lots of people queuing
oh,
up.
okay.
So I need you to be
Well, but
really
that was the elephant, I think,
in the room. Yeah.
in the room. So we dealt with the elephant. Now I can be much faster. Green bonds, great thing to do. I am proud. I was at the World Bank when the bank issued the first green bond,
right, yeah.
2007. They have the impact on directing investments to green, and it is now a road well traveled. They have increased dramatically. Therefore, the EU would have a much easier time to go that way, and going that way it must. On financial markets and own resources, so what we are seeing is a very interesting environment in which markets, after initial shock, have calmed down. They have calmed down on the basis of governments taking tremendous actions and central banks pouring huge liquidity. Interest rates are low, and that is likely to remain so. Of course, we always have to be mindful of tightening of financial conditions. And should that happen, there would be repercussions. But for now, at least, we have all the indicators showing that we are in a partial and uneven recovery, but recovery nonetheless. And therefore, we can expect the situation to be favorable for accommodative policies. For the EU, own resources remain an issue that I'm glad to see is being pushed forward. It will have to continue to be so because of the global challenges. The countries are facing challenges together, and that takes me to the issue of those that are more carbon intensive in their industrial structure. Obviously, solidarity means helping these countries. And I see that new funds that you is putting forward do pay attention to the need to help countries restructure their economies. But restructuring is to happen. Change is unstoppable. And therefore, for countries, it is much better to take a deliberate policy action with clear pathway that is done in a way that is not destroying communities,
Exactly.
and look for ways to diversify economies away from these industries that by 2050 we would see being very much on the shrinking side. I'm grateful for the praise I heard for Jeffrey. Jeffrey is very dynamic. Jeffrey Okamoto, my first deputy managing director. He is also the younger generation in our team. He brings the average age of my senior management down very effectively. So thanks for this feedback. And let me say on gender equality, actually, my last time with the Friends of Europe was on this topic, on gender equality. And
That's
unfortunately,
right.
what we see today is risk of reversal. Women are in contact dependent industries. They're hit hardest. They're often in the informal economy. They're hit hardest. They are those that do most of the jobs that are high risk to deal with COVID. They're hit hardest. They work more at home, and now we all operate from home. They are hit hardest.
Yeah.
Girls more than boys are likely to not go back to school once they drop out in developing countries. And unfortunately, gender-based violence is going up.
Sure.
So what
Kristalina,
does that
if I may
mean?
push you, because I need you to be briefer, but we know that, right? And you know that. It's the question in people's minds is, and so what? And so what? What do we do to change that? Will the IMF be putting out potentially a roadmap that says, actually, gender equality is the right thing to do to create a better, building back better economic green recovery? Let me put that question to you directly.
We have been doing it before, and we have to do more of it now. There is evidence that gender-based budgeting works. Do it. And there is evidence that when we invest in education of boys and especially girls, it works. So do it. And you would see the fund has tremendously increased the analysis on matters of inequality, including gender inequality, in our Article 4 consultations, and how that translated specific policy advice.
But it's good to hear from someone who's the head of the IMF saying, actually, a gender equal economic recovery is a better recovery at the end of the day. And it's good to hear that you actually will both provide that guidance, but actually saying very clear in that way, just do it. I'm going to move to our citizens now. We have citizens platform. We have something called the Debating Europe, which has around 5.5 million people that engage with politics of Europe and politicians on a regular basis. So I want to invite Caroline. Caroline, are you there? You're going to post some questions from citizens on this particular issue. Over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Dharmendra, and thank you to you, Madam Georgieva, for your very interesting and optimistic insights. So our first citizens' question is from Dionys, and Dionys is worried that if Europe prioritizes renewables for its recovery plan, it will be economically disadvantaged compared to other regions of the world. Okay. Do you think that he's right to be worried?
Okay, then give me this. Is there another question? Is that we only have one question, right? Great, brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. Kristalina.
Back to me. Yes, Dionys is right to be concerned that if other parts of the world hang on the high intensity industries, that could be a problem for competitiveness of Europe. But I would turn this around. Mm-hmm. The future is green. The future is low carbon. And Europe investing in research and development more aggressively at a higher level and transforming its own economy faster is a winner in this competition for the economy of tomorrow. So I think it is important to recognize, though, that there would be parts of the European society, there would be European people that are impacted, and Europe can address the needs of fairness in how we do that transition. And at the same time, Europe has a very strong voice globally, including in my institution,
Yes.
advocating for everybody to do the right thing. And that is what we do. And advocate not just on emotional ground, but advocate with the language of economics.
Well, very well said. We have a number of other people. I'm going to ask all of you, including yourself, Kristalina. I'm really sorry because we've got so many people who want to engage with you, and I've only got less than 20 minutes in this discussion. So those of you I'm going to invite, be brief if you can, so we create space for others. Luke Bass. You need to unmute. Briefly introduce yourself and your question.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'm Luc Bas, and I'm the European Regional Director for IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. And my question is in relation to the bigger picture for a green recovery, because we tend to, of course, focus on carbon and energy-related challenges, which are very important. But we still don't hear enough, neither in Europe, neither beyond, on the sustainable land use and the need for sustainable land use. We didn't hear it too much in the speech or in the State of the Union of the President of the Commission, which for the rest, of course, on climate change was applaudable. So in short, the other elephant in the room, that was, I think that's the second one then, is the policies in Europe, and maybe not so much for the detriment of biodiversity and nature in Europe, because that's a big challenge, but the trade distortion caused by the enormous amount of subsidies, harmful subsidies into unsustainable agriculture and land use, and how that poses a challenge in the deliberations of EMF, but also in reaching a real green recovery, because it's not really discussed at the moment, and we need a real reform of the common agriculture policy if we want to be credible in the Green Deal.
Thank you for raising that highly controversial point, Luke, because actually CAP is the thing that could be another potential game changer, but it is an elephant in the room. I have, and also, if there's anyone from the private sector on Zoom, I would really welcome you our engagement, because we haven't heard from you, because a lot of this is going to affect you, and I'd really welcome the opportunity to engage you or share your views on this. The next person I'm going to call is Ambassador Salas. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, please. Nice to welcome you here. Just introduce yourself very briefly and your question.
Yes. My name is Sergio Alfaro. I am the ambassador of Costa Rica in Brussels. I wanted to ask if these guidelines of spending on public money on recovery could be extended to other economies beyond the big ones, because we are looking that in the big economies, this way of facing the crisis is posing good results. But what about other economies, are Latin American or other in the world? And a second issue, on this carbon pricing, how to take in count not by products, not each product carbon contain, but the developing of the how the country develops in the country producing this item develops in the environmental way. My country
and
is
the
very
consequences for that. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I have, this is going to be difficult. I apologize in advance if I get your spelling, your pronunciation wrong. Kristalina? Did I?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. Can you hear me well?
Thank you. I can hear you. We can hear you.
Perfect.
Do introduce yourself briefly and your question.
Of course, of course. So I'm a member of the European Parliament representing the Socialists and Democrats group here. So thank you for organizing this, and thank you for giving me the chance to ask my questions. I'm going to be quite brief. Ms. Georgieva, thank you for sharing your views on the matter. I think they're pretty important. I really like the three main aspects you raised in the beginning: act decisively, spend more, and focus on the most vulnerable people. And my question is actually related to that. As you know, as part of this transition, the EU is focusing on spending some extra money basically to help this transition. And one of the mechanisms we are using is the so-called Just Transition Fund. As you're aware, I'm sure in July, the Council had decided that this money is going to be 4 times smaller than the amount the Parliament had suggested, which basically is going to bring a lot of regions in Europe to a very uncompetitive stage in terms of being able to go through that transition smoothly and effectively and efficiently as many other regions. My question is, if this remains the final decision for the EU and this funding is really that much less than initially proposed, in what capacity the World Bank, and in particular the IMF, would be able to leverage some private capital to support this transition towards more sustainable economy? Thank you.
And before you go, let me ask that, and if you can be brief in your response.
Of course.
The challenge back to you as an MEP. You know, I said to Dragos, no, because all of you, I mean, you've got a fresh new bunch, but all of you have a role to play to make sure that taxpayers' money, the largest amount of taxpayers' money, is used well. What's your view on that in terms of the role you'll play to be accountable?
So this is a big question, and that's why currently, especially for that new funding, we're pretty strict on the rule of law mechanism, and this being one of the main conditions for us spending the money going forward, because this is quite important to be able to return the trust of the EU citizens in the institutions that was a bit shaky during this crisis.
Thanks for putting it that way, because it is about the return of trust. I'm glad you placed it in that way. Very briefly, Kristalina, can I ask you to kind of skip through some of the responses to those significant questions?
IUCN, the point from IUCN, I wholeheartedly agree. We do have to concentrate a lot on land degradation, reforestation, mangroves restoration, and making sure that the ecosystems function well. The good news there is these are job-rich activities. And I agree that the Common Agriculture Policy can move forward more. It has begun greening some years ago. It continues to go in that direction. We need to do more. Tomorrow, the Paulson Institute is going to launch a study on valuing biodiversity and ecosystems, and I will be there. And I just want to second that when we talk about climate change, it should not be seen only from the prism of emission reduction. By the way, in agriculture, methanes, there is plenty to reduce as well. It also has to be seen from adaptation to climate risk and the health of our planet, the health of its ecosystems on which we depend. Costa Rica is a great country in terms of leadership in this arena. So I'm so glad that the ambassador of Costa Rica posed the question.
Yeah.
We are going to have during our annual meetings a designated, they are in October, just in a month from now, a designated discussion with finance ministers from the Global Coalition of Finance Ministers for Action on Climate. And what we are hosting it, we, the IMF, are hosting it. And of course, we will bring there a more calibrated message globally, not just one. Right now, we are discussing the EU, but we are doing work for all other regions. And in Latin America, there is plenty to discuss from the protection of ecosystems and the biodiversity of the region to opportunities to move on mitigation and to the very high risk, high vulnerability, especially of the small island economies to the impacts of climate change. The fund is engaged. We have our roundtable discussions with each region, and I very much look forward to engage with Costa Rica because of the actions you have taken that we can learn from. In terms of the last set of questions, if we do not balance ambition for transformation with just transition, there is risk that we would not succeed to achieve our objectives. We have seen people on the street in France when energy prices went up. We have seen in the countries with a higher share of coal a concern about making that transition. So I do hope that Europe will find ways to emphasize clearly that just the transition is not a slogan. This is a fundamental part of the transformation Europe takes forward. And I wish you all the very best in arguing this case from your position in the European Parliament. As for what we can do, you rightly brought up the World Bank. It has a bigger role in terms of investment strategies and their implementation than the fund. What we do from the fund is to make sure that our own lending accompanies countries' policies that are transformative in the right way. Greener, fairer, smarter recovery.
There's something about the narrative that you and others who are leading these financial institutions are going to have to repeat time and time again. But we'll come back to that because that's the only way where the message will drop. I want to bring in someone from the private sector. We've got McKinsey. Solveig.
Yes.
Hello. I can't hear you. We can't hear you.
Well, I hear you really well. You sure?
You just increase your volume a bit more, Solveig.
You hear me?
Perfect now. Welcome.
Wonderful.
Just
Amanda, good to
fairly
see you.
briefly introduce yourself. You're also a partner of our State of Europe Roundtable that's happening in October. Looking forward to your kind of question or comment.
Absolutely. So my name is Solveig Hieronymus. I'm a senior partner at McKinsey, and I lead both our client service to the EU and also globally the topic of sustainability with government. So this conversation could personally not be closer to my heart.
Good.
Thank you for taking it. And I wanted to build actually on exactly your point without me knowing that you were going to make it, Amanda, on the narrative. And I do think that coming out of this crisis, in order to embed the topic of sustainability, we need a positive narrative and we need a simple narrative, and so one that's probably close to people's hearts. And in the end, these are two factors how we look at it. Is one is economic growth, that is any of the measure actually stimulates sustainable economic growth, and the second one most prominently is jobs. So if we were to filter through those two lenses, I think many of the issues would be more positive and simpler. And I would love to hear how you view this, because in the end, this is what people, I think, care about, employment at the very core. If we were to simplify, I think we would win a broader body of the church in many of these measures that are often very defensive on regulation and cost and pricing and tax. I think we need to take a different spin on this.
Solveig, thank you for that. And before you go, stay on, because you're interacting with the private sector all the time. It'll be interesting to know what what's kind of in that initial reaction been, but also very briefly, and this is not for perhaps not now, but perhaps something that we have engaged in the conversation State of Europe, is that this is the biggest public debt we've encountered historically, right? We're going to have countries in the black hole. They've got trillions. They've got no tax receipts. And it's almost like a no man's land of experience where no country in the world has ever experienced this kind of economic balance sheet. And what we have to do about that, because people are thinking about the here and now, but in the next 3 years, the thing's going to really bite. So just very briefly, your response to the private sector and what you think about that broader point.
I think it's an acute awareness of the private sector. I mean, you see European CEOs organizing by the dozens, like whether it's the WEF, another private group. I mean, they're like the will to actually move on sustainability. We would have thought by our clients that the topic might actually drop in the wake of the crisis. It actually didn't. It's even higher on the CEO agenda. Because both in the public and the private sector, everybody's aware every euro or dollar, no matter what geography you're in, which is going to be spent in the next 5 years, it's going to be just spent once because we will be out of cash. So the question is how you're going to spend it, and frankly, what side of history you're going to be on. And I think this is both the public and the private sector very aligned. The questions from both sides are, how can one side actually help the other?
Yeah.
So what part of actually some of the green recovery measures are actually cash positive if regulated well? So it's not always the public sector who needs to spend, but if regulated well, for instance, actually it's certainly cash positive for some of the private sector actors. I think bringing those two perspectives together from both sides who do realize it's a unique opportunity, it's an emergency. If we don't move now, we will neither have the time nor the cash to actually address it in the next.
Indeed, and it goes back to your point, Solveig, about a new narrative, which isn't about the private sector just coming in, but about a different kind of relationship between public and private, which is about a different and positive bottom social good line, rather than the let's say the profit gain or making sure services work. This is about a joint endeavor, working together with a different kind of social contract amongst the private and the public sector. We have very little time, and I'm going to take two more. I have Jarno Sub. Jarno? You're on mute. Hello,
Yes,
I hope
hello.
I've pronounced your name. Very briefly introduce yourself and your question.
Yes, again, Strube. I'm also a senior partner from McKinsey based in Munich, and I'm leading what we call the capital projects and infrastructure practice globally, meaning that in the end, how do we design the future infrastructure for our world, which obviously has a huge impact on the green agenda. I find this discussion very stimulating, and I wanted to a bit push toward the higher note and say, what do we need to do to really get the energy tuned toward doing the things effectively? Because I think that in the end, it's good to have a debate, but I think it's also now time to spend the money effectively that we have and make sure that it's being deployed right. And I still see a lot of hesitation and even a bit questions in many participants, at least in the infrastructure industry, on how do we get that done? And I would like to get a bit of thoughts of how, what do we need to do to channel it?
Thank you, Jarno. Finally, Rob Shirky. You're on mute.
Nice to see you, Dharmendra.
Lovely to see you. How are you? Please do introduce yourself.
So my name is Rob. I'm a lawyer and a climate change advocate here in Canada. And my question for Kristalina is, I'll just introduce it by way of a brief story. It was 2006 or 2008. We had a federal election in Canada where Stéphane Dion, he was the leader of the Liberal Party, ran on exactly what you're describing. Price carbon, shift taxes from labor, just transition, money into renewables, and so on. And the opposition, Stephen Harper, the leader of the Conservatives, called it a tax grab, and he was our prime minister for 10 years or so. And I see that conversation still happening today, and it's frustrating. I don't know what the answer is, so I'd love to hear. I agree 100% on what you're saying, but what's the politics behind the implementation? Something hopeful, because I worry I've become like a cup of coffee that was once bold and warm and flavorful, and now I'm just cold and bitter.
Rob, lovely.
Give me something hopeful on implementation. Thank you.
Lovely to see you again. And you're one of our European young leaders. Welcome back. It's good to see you. And your point is that you're drawing Kristalina into a political comment. So let's see if she'll actually go into that space. Kristalina.
It is actually quite aligned in the last questions. Rob, you remind me Jean-Claude Juncker, who was the previous president of the Commission. I work with him, has this very famous saying that we all know what is the right thing to do. We just don't know how to get re-elected when we do it. So politics matters. And I want to say two things on this. One, we are not anymore in 2008, we are in 2020. And the shocks from the climate crisis are much more visible. The effects of it are much more visible. Yes, we still have people who say, oh no, it's not for real, it's gonna go away. But the vast majority of the public now understands that. And from what I can see is Canada has gone again in the same direction of saying we have to create incentives to move it. In my view, it is very important not to talk about just that we tax carbon, but what we're going to do with the money and what is the opportunity cost of it. We know, and that goes to the first point about how much we borrow and somebody has to pay that back, we will have to raise revenues over time. And the question is, do I take more from your paycheck by increasing your taxes? Or actually, I give you a rebate because we are taxing polluting industries and shifting the economy in a direction that is not going to harm us. And it is very important to structure that argument, specifically on pricing carbon. I want us to start from what is it that we are not going to price? We're not going to put more pressure on labor and on consumption. So you have more money in your pockets. It's actually better for growth to tax pollution rather than to tax labor. And it is incredibly important to really think of the young people who are going to be those who are paying all these bills.
Yes.
And listen to their voice. And Europe and everybody, every young person I happen to talk to, much more sensitive about the legacy we are leaving
exactly.
for you to live with. But it is important to have the narrative right. And in the way I talk about it is, policies are for people. They have to improve your opportunities and your well-being. And then be clear that it is a world in which if growth is not sustainable, it is just not going to be there. And I think that institutions like mine have a huge opportunity to listen to these conversations. And that is why I'm here. This is why I'm engaging with you, so we can bring this narrative to the hearts and minds of millions and millions of people that have to be on board if we are to sail in that future. I also want to bring Rob brought an anecdote. I'm going to bring an anecdote from kind of pretty much the same time. It was the mid 2000s. My mother at that time was 82. And I was director for environment at the World Bank. I had really hard time to explain to her why I worry about the changing climate. So she says, pollution, I understand. Protecting the species, the God's creatures, I understand. But what's wrong with a little bit of warmer climate? So it gets warmer. For me, older woman, the winters would be nicer. And then she calls me in the middle of the night. I was in DC, and she says, I got it. I got why you worry about changing climate. Because for the first time in her life, she saw four things she has never seen before. In Bulgaria, there were heat waves, people died.
Yep.
Forest fires devastating the country, and then pouring rain, and then roads sliding in the Black Sea. So my conclusion, if my mother could get it, I kind of hope we all can get it.
Absolutely, Kristalina, I think you're absolutely right. And as you know, these temperatures that we're encountering, when you speak to people on the street and elsewhere, they're saying, this is great. It's great to be out in the cafe. They're not actually thinking that what we're experiencing right now is a climate crisis temperature. You know, it's unheard of, and it's only going to get worse. Thank you, Kristalina, because I know you need to go back. There's one thing I would like you to just comment on, or just to pass on, is that point about narrative. Because I think that we are in uncharted territory in terms of public finance, borrowing, the playing of the markets into the future, and the public debt, and we don't know how it's going to behave, especially the economic hit. And I think, therefore, it's key that we have a narrative that's repeated by you and others across the globe if we're going to have a positive approach to this, which I'd like you to end on before me thanking everybody. Kristalina.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Go on.
I take it on board. I am grateful for the engagement we had today.
Excellent.
And yes, we do need to be coming with a positive, optimistic narrative for people. There is a need to mobilize all of us.
Indeed.
And we can do that when we believe that we can act and get something done.
brilliant note to end on. Thank you. Thank you for your time, Kristalina. It's been wonderful, and I hope that we can engage you again in about 6 months' time to bring you back to discuss this very topic and see how do we get on, given where we find ourselves today. I want to thank all of you. You know that we're going to have our annual State of Europe Roundtable online in October from the 12th to the 15th. And we've got some significant partners supporting us in this, from McKinsey Global Institute, Coca-Cola, Edwards Life Sciences, and others. So thank you for partnering with us. Stay tuned for the next set of events. We have a number this week, but also look forward to welcome you again for the State of Europe Roundtable. Kristalina, thank you. Thank you for your time and for your generosity of time, but also honesty of engagement. Looking forward to seeing you again. Take care. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.